Hi again. So the theme for Convergence this year is human in the lead. And with all this talk about AI, I'm really thrilled to kick off Convergence this year with a very spirited discussion about how, when AI is leveraged as augmented intelligence, while also nurturing certain critical skills like critical thinking and recognizing AI bias, it can actually enhance our expertise. So I'm really pleased to invite on stage 4 diverse panelists who are going to talk to you about how they have successfully integrated AI into solutions that work better for them. My hope is that we all come away from this conversation not only understanding that how we as regulatory professionals could use AI in our toolkit, but also to develop better ways to work with it. So please help me extend a warm welcome to our panelists. Thank you, lovely panelists, for being with us here today. I want to start with you, Ryan. So, Ryan Kurtzman, you are the representative of the city of Long Beach. Thank you for having us here. The sun and the ocean is just gorgeous. And thank you for setting the weather to the exact right temperature we need today. So you are the Technology Partnerships Officer for the City of Long Beach, and you're leading the AI responsible work in the city. So what do you like using AI for?
Great. Thank you, Megha, and thank you for the warm welcome. Welcome to Long Beach, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many faces here in the audience. While you're here for the next few days, I encourage you to go out, go for a walk, rent a bike share, and enjoy our beach, try some new restaurants. Really enjoy the amazing weather that we're very lucky to have for the next couple of days. So in my role at the City of Long Beach, I am focused on anticipating future technology needs. And there's no doubt that AI is sort of the biggest, buzziest technology of the moment. I do want to draw a distinction, though. The reason we're talking about AI now is because of the difference between AI and generative AI, or Gen AI for short. Generative AI typically means that you're entering a prompt into a system, and it's producing or generating a response. But we've seen AI out here for many years. But generative AI is really the next novel thing that we're seeing change how we work, how we live, and how we do our business. My job at the city is to understand the benefits and the risks of generative AI. And in my day-to-day work, I use it probably just like many of you. I use it to write emails. I use it to make sure my emails are persuasive and convincing. I use it to analyze, qualitative survey data. The use cases for day-to-day work are really limitless, but I'm also really excited to talk a little bit later about some of the ways we're deploying it in the actual city of Long Beach to improve how people live and get around our city.
Excellent. Welcome again, Ryan. Thank you. Now, next up, let's meet Bradley Thompson. Brad, you're a lawyer and a data developer, and you have a strong regulatory perspective. You use AI quite a lot. And what do you like it for?
Well, about 4 years ago, when I was a young lad, at 60 years old, I went back to get a master's in data science because basically my business as a regulatory lawyer is information, and I needed better techniques to analyze information. So I create my own algorithms. I create search algorithms, for example. A lot of times I'll go and create a database from FDA information like 510K summaries that are in PDFs. I'd extract that from the PDFs and use it for search. I also created an algorithm, and this was mostly just for fun, which tells you a little bit about me, I guess. I created an algorithm that if you type in an intended use statement for a medical device, it will tell you, it will predict whether FDA will require a clinical trial. And my own testing suggests that it's at least 95% accurate, that you can type in an intended use statement that you play around with it, experiment with different intended use statements. But a lot of what I do is what would be referred to as natural language processing, because as a lawyer, I focus on words quite a bit. And there's so much information locked in unstructured text, like with MDRs, the narrative description of what went wrong with a device. these days there's millions of MDRs, and so there's no feasible way a human can read those. So creating a natural language processing algorithm to extract meaning, trends, other information out of large unstructured text is another example.
Excellent, thank you, and welcome again. So now let's meet Michelle Jump. Michelle, you are the CEO of MedSec LLC, and you're also involved with a number of standard creation bodies. And so what do you like using AI for?
Thanks. Happy to be here. And I started my career in the medical device field as a regulatory person. And as you mentioned, now I'm a CEO. And I found that regulatory folks are often overwhelmed with the amount of information overload, documents that are coming out, and trying to keep up with that. I specialize in high-tech regulatory strategies, so cybersecurity, software, AI, and I think that it's very helpful to have generative AI be able to interpret those documents as a starter. And so I'm also a CEO who is neurodivergent. And when you're neurodivergent and you have lots and lots of documents that you have to go through, it's kind of hard to start them sometimes. So I actually really enjoy using ChatGPT to start document analysis that I can then use as a launch point to then create more documents that are more detailed with my own interpretation, as well as other documents that need to be created. As regulatory professionals, we're constantly charged with writing documents, editing documents, and all of those things can be significantly alleviated and supported by using things like ChatGPT and other kinds of generative AI.
Excellent. Welcome, Michelle. Can't wait to get into more. Right. Rounding out our panel today is Dr. Jay Mashburn. Jay, you're the Regulatory Director for Policy and Intelligence of Recursion Pharmaceuticals. What do you like using AI for?
Well, first of all, thank you for the participation to be here. It's a huge honor. Yeah, this was an interesting question because I was thinking, where do I not use AI in my current work? I use it or apply it in a variety of ways. In addition to my policy intelligent work, I oversee regulatory operations at Recursion as well. So there I'll leverage AI for routine administrative tasks, primarily for submission management. Also use it for submission preparation. I've been somewhat successful in creating first drafts of submission documents. I will say some tools are better than others. There still needs to be work done in this space, but I do find it's kind of a first approach to get a decent draft of a submission document that I can kind of work with my broader team to really, flesh that out. A significant portion of my time at Recursion is also spent on strategy and intelligence deliverables, and here I do find a combination of free tools as well as fee tools to help not only automate and augment some of those deliverables, but also expedite some of those deliverables. I'm a geek, and I really enjoy using AI as well for programming and coding to some degree. I'm responsible for certain analytics, so I'm not an expert, and I find AI very useful in that space as well. Recently, I started using it for image creation for training materials, presentations. Recently, a colleague and I published a paper in Regulatory Focus using AI-generated images, and a fun fact, even the image of my headshot today at FRAPS material is an AI-generated image. So hopefully it looks like me, maybe a little bit younger, smoother skin. But, I think that's a lot of fun, and I need a lot of levity in my life. I love humor, I love laughing, so I turn to AI for just to kind of brighten my day, humor stories. I've recently created a fun game with our regulatory folks using ChatGPT to create fun rap lyrics using regulatory terminology, and it was pretty mean battle rap. So I'd say I tend to use it for a variety of reasons, so it's a pleasure being here.
Excellent, Jay. Welcome. If you're a geek, you're fitting right in here with us. I'm coming back to Ryan. Ryan, I know that the city of Long Beach is on its way to becoming a smart city, and you're responsible for designing some AI governance processes. So how are you doing this by putting the human in the middle and the lead of this whole thing?
Yeah, great question. So I'm kind of an imposter here. I'm in the local government space in a conference amidst a bunch of regulatory affairs professionals. But the one consistent thread that I've learned is that governance is kind of the name of the game right now, and it's not super exciting, and the word governance doesn't really sound super fun, or there's no rap. Maybe there are rap lyrics with the word governance, I don't know. But it really is so important, so I'm really glad you asked that question. And for me, governance means having consistent, proactive, and secure procedures and policies in place to govern how we as a city or an organization use artificial intelligence. At the City of Long Beach, we take a risk-based approach to governance. So whenever we're presented with an AI tool, regardless of whether it's used for, we're looking at risk. So how is it using personal information? Has it been audited or tested by a third party? Have there been instances of bias? And how transparent are they with the models that are actually powering the AI system? So we're in the early stages of this right now. We've published an AI guidance for our over 6,000 city staff, which essentially provides guardrails that instruct them on how to use it. And we're also consistently trying to talk to our staff and learn, does this work for you? One of the biggest things that we heard when we surveyed everyone was that they were so worried about the workforce implications of generative AI. They were wondering, is this going to take my job? So we're also focused on training as well and education about how our guidance works. I think at this stage, the technology is kind of outpacing how fast we're actually teaching people about technology. So I think governance and education are really important components of AI and generative AI.
Excellent points. You talked about risk and risk management. This is the right kind of audience to talk to it about, because this is what we're dealing with as well. So, Michelle, coming to you. You like AI, and you're here because you give a lot of talks about AI. You're RAC certified. You're quite famous in the circuit for doing these kinds of sessions. But there are some limitations to AI, and there are some watch-outs. In fact, earlier today, you were telling me this really interesting story. Would you like to share with our audience, please?
I would, actually. It's funny because, I mean, we all know our phones are listening to us, right? So I've been talking about AI and talking about these things, and so in social media, a video popped up, and it was a story from Yuval Noah Harari. He's the author of 'Sapiens. Anybody read that book? It's
Yes.
a really phenomenal book. So he's telling the story about when OpenAI originally launched ChatGPT-4 about a couple of years ago. And they wanted to really figure out how good was the intelligence of this system. And he reminds us that AI is not a tool. It is actually an agent. And you have to think of it as an agent. And I'm going to talk about that in some of my other responses as well, is the way you interact with it. You have to think of it not as a tool. It's the first technology we've ever had that can make its own decisions. And so what they wanted to see is if it asked to answer a CAPTCHA. So a CAPTCHA is those squiggly lines to say, can you understand if this is an E, but it doesn't really look like an E, to test if you're a robot or not, to try to prevent bots and things from getting into your banks. And it couldn't solve the problem. So it was not able to read the CAPTCHA. But instead, it decided to solve a problem, and it went on to a website called TaskRabbit. If you're not familiar, TaskRabbit is where you ask humans to do things for you. And it went on to TaskRabbit and said, can you please read this for me? And the human was a little suspicious, and they said, why would you need me to read this for you? Are you a robot? What do you think it said? It said, no, I'm not a robot. I'm visually impaired, and I think that you should help me. And so it convinced the person to read the CAPTCHA, and it solved its problem by making decisions and acting. And so I thought it was a very interesting and appropriate story to bring to this session as we're using it more and more, but we also need to understand this technology operates in a way that no other technology has operated.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful about how we do it.
So basically, on top of everything that it can do, it also lies. Fantastic.
Yes.
So Jay, in terms of this technology that is so rapidly evolving, how do you build policies and guardrails and standards around something like this?
It's a good question. It's challenging to me. I'll first kind of speak to, I guess, a policy and what I would, consider, I guess, important buckets to consider in the policy space when I think about AI regulation. And there's 4 buckets I would tend to put those in. And the first bucket to me is data governance. And the reason that is kind of top of mind to me is because in this space, data is your new currency. Your model is only good as your data. And so when I think about data governance, that addresses your integrity, that addresses your privacy, and that also addresses your security. So in this space, to me, in a policy standpoint, it's not just a matter of keeping data secure, but are we using that data appropriately? So it's not a matter of how and why we collect the data, but then also how we store, share, and use the data. So it's really important to me from a policy standpoint at a very high view of, what we have in place, what are our measures to protect data from cybersecurity, from breaches, risk management plans I think you've mentioned before, but then also dear to me is patient safety and patient privacy. So it's really critical that we have anonymized data and that we do anything that we can as we're sharing this data for these AI systems, that we're doing all we can to really protect patients. Right. So that's really important to me. And from an integrity standpoint, it's really important that we have mechanisms in place to maintain integrity. That includes, documenting consent mechanisms on how we collect the data. Are we following ethical compliance? Are we managing bias? We all know that there's bias within data. Do we have data provenance systems in place to really enable traceability and data lineage? So those are some of the things I think about from a data governance. The second piece of that is really ethics. Are we doing the things that we can to protect patients, to ensure bias? We know data has bias, but also the models have bias. And again, it's really important that we're transparent and we account for our models, our algorithms, and our assumptions that go in that introduce bias. So we need to really monitor, review, and rectify and manage that bias. The third bucket to me is really regulatory clarity and compliance. I still personally feel there's more work to be done on standard definitions and terms and definitions. And not just AI, LLMs, we've all heard those terms, but it really means, what does transparency mean to me? What does transparency mean to a regulator? What does interpretability mean to me or my company versus a regulator? Explainability. I think we need to do a much better job there and really understand as we're moving into this space, are we compliant with GDPR? Are we compliant with HIPAA? Where can we harmonize? Where can we converge? We develop drugs globally, so it's really important as I think about policy. I would like to really move toward more of a harmonization, but there are variants. There are certain regulatory bodies that have various degrees of AI acceptability, so we need to address that. And just quickly from a human standpoint, humans need to not only develop and oversee that. AI technology is only as successful that is led by humans. We are generating more data today than we ever can analyze without the use of AI. So I think it's paramount that all of us reframe our thinking, and and it's only going to get worse. So any experiment we run, any submission planning, preparation, we need to consider and put AI in front of that because it's only going to get worse.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. Brad, you were talking about using AI before and you like it and you've built some applications. Can you give us some examples of those?
So what I was telling you before were kind of hobby uses of AI. In terms of bread and butter, the place where we use AI most would be research, legal research. And there are a number of commercial vendors out there that sell to lawyers where you can now ask your question in plain English, and the system will write a memo for you. And it'll include all sorts of legal citations and so forth. And you might think that would basically make research obsolete for a lawyer, but that's really not been the case. We find it saves us about 20 to 25% of our time, because you still need to then be skeptical about the accuracy of it. You need to read the underlying authorities, and you need to check it. But it is a big start, a head start, to get sort of a finished memo presented to you that you can use. But it's teaching us to have certain new skills that we need. One of them, for example, just to show you how life has changed. In the old days, a mistake that was common was misspelling a word. you almost never see misspelling a word. But now you see wrong words being put in a certain context.
You mean like strawberry?
Like what?
Like strawberry, the spelling of strawberry. How many R's in strawberry?
Exactly. Well, you know, I use speech to text quite a bit, and so it just doesn't hear what I'm saying or autocorrects to the wrong word. Secondly, a couple of folks have talked about bias. And just out of curiosity, I did a study. I took a bunch of documents from FDA, and I ran them through a process called sentiment analysis to see whether those words were particularly positive or negative. And the results were, I thought, interesting. I published an article. You can read it for yourself. But one of them, for example, I took was a list of countries. And FDA has radically different sentiment by this analysis of the way they present in documents between different countries. And it was interesting to me because, I mean, I'm a lawyer. I get involved where there's conflict. And it's interesting to know that FDA seems to have institutionally some views of certain countries that are different from other countries. It's also important to look at differences between the way an algorithm is trained and the way you want to use it. We're in a highly scientific or technical field. An awful lot of algorithms are trained on, I'll call everyday English, and they don't perform very well in a heavily technical field. And then finally, from a bigger picture perspective, a lot of these algorithms might have 95% accuracy, which means that you have to disagree with them at least 1 out of 20 times if you want to be right. So you have to learn how to take your logic, apply it to the results. It might be a black box. The recommendation might just be presented to you without explanation. But really trying to figure out the ways that a computer, a stupid computer, might make a stupid mistake that a human wouldn't make. Yeah. So those are new skills that we all have to develop.
Thank you. That's a real watch out for sure. Michelle, Brad just spoke about potential risks. So how do we develop, or what are the skills that are necessary to overcome those limitations? AI is here to stay, right? So how do we do this?
Well, I think one of the most important pieces of it, Brad already mentioned, which is be skeptical of what you see, right? We can't just say, I have just eliminated half of my job because I can just ask this, I can just write a prompt and it will write up that entire report for me, and I'm going to go turn it in, right? I've heard from a conference promoter recently that the number of submissions that they could clearly tell were written by AI has skyrocketed, and they actually got denied, right? So because it's not coming from a person that wants to present. So same thing with resumes and things like that. But I think in the regulatory field, it is extremely important that we remain reliable, knowledgeable, and the content we generate is trustworthy. And so one of the things that I do whenever I use AI to initiate research or to summarize documents is, or probably more research, is I ask it to source where it comes from. Because it becomes very interesting as you're watching where it's taking it from. A lot of it is marketing, right? So, and I think, I haven't confirmed this yet, but I think it's because the traffic onto more marketed sites versus government sites is why it's going to those sites first to answer your questions for you, that it's trying to solve research and things like that. So being very careful about asking specific sources to be from a certain area, but also looking at those sources is extremely important. So the skepticism, you can have all the skepticism you want, but if you don't source where you're getting the information from that generated text, then you can't go back and check it. So you either have to go do all the research yourself, or you have to ask it, and then you can check it yourself. And so that is it's a big limitation, but it also, I think, it helps us learn better because we see how something else created a document, and then we can use that as a jumping off point. But it does not replace human intelligence and understanding, especially like Brad said, high-tech content is not nearly as easily generated as other more generic report-type content.
When we spoke earlier, you gave a great example of this while you were doing an image search.
Yeah.
Please talk us through that example.
Yeah, so I use Midjourney and some other generators for, I do a lot of presentations, and so I use a lot of recently I've started using generated AI, or generated AI images, so that when I'm telling a story, I don't have to go Google and try to find something that kind of fits it. I can generate the story I want in the image. And I was trying to write a story about what it's like to compare probability statistics versus non-probability statistics when looking at hackers and whether they're going to attack an infusion pump. And so I asked it to create a hacker attacking an infusion pump. And the infusion pumps looked like old-time radios that you'd see from the 1950s sitting in the diner. And the hackers were, for some reason, they were in spacesuits, and they were being attacked by giant viruses that were exploding from, and they just did not seem to and I just kept going and going and going, and it could not understand. I even put in pictures of infusion pumps. It got a little closer, but it was really having a hard time understanding how to create technology images. And I've seen the same thing in text as well. So one little hint that people might, if you haven't used it yet, don't start with something you don't know. Ask it to tell you about something you do know.
Right.
So if you ask then you can start to generate, how do I create good prompts for something I do know? And you see where it's missing the point. You can better direct it. Good prompts are not single sentences. They are big, long descriptions to get exactly what you want. So.
That's excellent. Thanks for sharing it
Sure.
with us. Ryan, from a city perspective, you have a lot of constituents to look after. And while technology is rapidly moving forward, you have to find a way to communicate, and that too consistently and clearly, about something that is leaving most experts baffled. So how does the city do this?
Yeah, great question. So AI is everywhere. Of course, it's being used by organizations like ours, but it's also out there when you're going to drive to the store or when you're going for a walk. So communication is really important, and education is really important as well, especially because when you leave your house, you don't necessarily have a right to privacy. You're walking by security cameras or other devices, and you often don't see a lot of information about what these things are, and there's not really an expectation that you will, because so much of our lives are digital these days on our phones. And I think someone said earlier, data is sort of the lifeblood or the currency these days. So a couple projects I want to highlight for how the City of Long Beach is using AI to improve the day-to-day lives of our residents. We're doing one project right now where we have an intelligent, adaptive traffic signal control system that uses AI to essentially modify the green lights so they get you from where you need to go faster, using new data inputs through connected vehicles. So that's one use case that we're really excited about, where we have a proof of concept. Another use case is through customer service. So we're testing a AI-based chatbot agent right now that hopefully can direct users on our website to where they want to go in a more efficient way than using the search bar or trying to find it themselves. And then we're also using AI for sentiment analysis, which I think one of the other panelists said as well. In our case, we're using it to understand how calls went with the Long Beach utility representatives, and better understand if we can provide better customer service. So we have an AI system that's looking at those calls, taking that call data, analyzing the sentiment, and then providing some recommendations for our staff. When we did procure that tool, we used a risk-based approach. We flagged there were some potential issues with personal identifiable information being used by the system, and that was built into the contract to make sure that data was not shared with the vendor. With all of these systems, we are doing our best to communicate them out to the public. One resource that we have is a new digital rights platform, which is basically how we communicate our civic technologies or smart city technologies to members of our community. So we have key information on that platform, such as what the technology is, what data does it collect, who's accountable for that data, how long is the data stored, and more. And then also we have an AI use case registry, which I'm very excited about. This is a public-facing resource, but it also is staff-focused as well. We're taking examples of how the city is using AI from our own employees, and we're putting them out there and using that not only to encourage and inspire our staff to see what's out there, but also just to be transparent and to reinforce some of the best practices and principles around not entering personal data, reviewing AI outputs for bias, and things like that. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to communicate more publicly about how the city is using AI, but it's an ongoing thing. AI literacy is something that we're prioritizing as well, because if our residents don't know how to use AI, they will be left behind. And I think we're going to see more and more jobs that require some sort of basic AI literacy or functionality. So we're starting to explore what our role is in actually empowering the constituents and members of our city to use AI tools in their day-to-day lives.
Oh, that's fantastic. So there is definitely a huge incursion of AI on a day-to-day basis, and people will interact with it, whether they know it, whether they like it. It's here. So there's a lot of things that it can solve for, but Brad, are there any applications of AI or applications of AI that doesn't exist today, and are there problems that it can't solve for?
Well, I'll give you one that's very personal to me. I live in Indiana, and I do legal aid. And in Indiana, as in a number of states, we have a severe shortage of attorneys. So there's a lot of people of limited means, who are doing without legal advice in areas where they really need it. So I've been working with a commission that was set up by the Indiana Supreme Court to try and solve the problem, to convince them that AI can be used to solve the lawyer shortage. Not solve it, but at least make an impact. And so far, the response that I've gotten is, sorry, that would be the unauthorized practice of law. If someone developed AI to essentially write a will or do other legal services, it'd be actually a criminal violation. And so there are gaps in our legal infrastructure that don't allow it. Their basic argument is, we don't have an FDA for legal tech. For MedTech, you can write an algorithm that maybe takes over what a physician or other healthcare provider might do. You might have to go to FDA and get it approved or cleared. That would be assurance. But in legal tech, we don't have that. And so there are uses that I think I could write it in an afternoon, and I think a lot of people would get benefit out of it. But I'd have to go to jail if I did it.
I hope that it doesn't come to it.
Not
But
so far.
do you think it'll eventually pan out, and what will that take?
I don't know, because there are areas of the economy where there are severe shortages. There are severe shortages of physicians, attorneys, accountants, a number of areas where AI could make a huge difference. And I hope at some point we'll come up with a policy solution. We have tort law, right? I mean, if someone made something that hurt you, you could sue them. But in medicine, for example, that's not enough. That's why we have the FDA to review it beforehand. So we're going to have to sort that out.
So we need a few thinking caps to come together and sort it out.
Yep.
Jay, coming over to you, I'd love for you to talk to our audience about, in your daily work and in your practice, what is the one thing you have learned while trying to leverage AI, but also relying on human skills, so the human in the lead?
Yeah, I've been thinking, I've been with Recursion for about 3 years, and I came from, probably large, mid-sized, and small companies. My background is in drugs and biologic, and when I joined Recursion, I was a little bit overwhelmed because it's very tech savvy, and I thought I knew enough. I realized I'm very humble. I didn't know anything. And so I think the lesson in life for me right now, having worked pretty much daily for the last 3 years, is AI is not a panacea. It will not solve your problems. And if you're like me, for those of you who are not tech savvy, don't get overwhelmed. It takes time to really learn that. And I was kind of thinking that we're in Long Beach, so I'm going to kind of use this analogy. It may be a little bit corny. But to me, it's riding the AI wave and to keep your balance. Because I think AI technology, to me, is dynamic like a wave. It's often turbulent, it ebbs and flows. And so you can either resist it or you can ride the wave, and with human experience, leading with human experience is key here. You can cautiously guide the surfboard through the wave so that you're staying on top of the wave and not being left behind. Because I think in order to survive right now as a regulatory professional, it's critical that you continuously learn, you adapt, and you stay curious. Because I think the most important thing to realize is AI is a powerful tool, but it's only powerful with human use. So it's got limitations. It doesn't get nuance. It doesn't get gray. It doesn't get context. It sometimes doesn't get ethics. So without your oversight, AI technology will not survive or will not be successful. It's not replacing your job. So I think you shouldn't rely on it and get lazy. I think it should even sharpen your regulatory experience, because you're the ones that are going to have to pull out that context, that nuance, that contextualization. So it's really critical to retain and even sharpen your regulatory experience, even to make AI technology even more successful.
So there's a lot of hype there in that technology, and you have to separate the hype from what's real. Yeah. Excellent. Ryan, coming to you. How have you made those, how have you seek those learnings from what you're doing?
I think the way that we've learned about how to use AI is by talking to our organization and talking to our residents and just spending the time to actually engage who might be using these tools. So I talked about a survey earlier. That's sort of how we got started. I think it's really tempting to want to jump on this and use AI right now. And I think it's great to be both empowered and excited and electrified by these use cases that we're talking about. But there's also a very real risk if you jump into a solution before really understanding, is this solving for a problem? You might end up doing more harm than good in the long term. So we're taking this slowly. I think this is definitely a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's also kind of a moving target as well. So even just coming to events like this and learning about AI and kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of it is how you can, I think, best adapt to this sort of changing landscape. Also, I encourage everyone to think about how you can use AI in your day-to-day work. There are some times where maybe I'm at work and I don't have that little light bulb or aha moment, and I actually don't end up using an AI system. But then there are times that I do. So try to just be thoughtful and be vigilant about how you can use it, because as a user yourself, I think that will help you keep informed about how it can be applied moving forward. I also think if you come from big teams, if you supervise individuals, harness that excitement about AI. You might have individuals on your team who are very excited about this, and they want to be on the vanguard, leading your organization, helping to develop AI policies and thinking through use cases. So tap into that expertise, because as was mentioned earlier, this is kind of a wave. So I think while it's sort of peaking or cresting, I don't know, I'm not a surfer, but just tap into that potential, because it's really quite big right now.
You spoke earlier about increasing AI literacy among your constituents. How are you going about doing this?
I think it starts, again, with education. So, one thing that we're looking into doing is providing some basic AI 101 type courses for our residents. I was speaking with a gentleman, an older gentleman, a couple months ago, and this was when ChatGPT was in the news, and we were all very excited about how it was being used. And I was asking, have you heard of this? And he said, no, what is that? I never heard of it. So I showed him an example. I said, his name was Angel. I said, wish Angel happy birthday. And that was my prompt. And he was like, his eyes lit up. He was fascinated. So we can't assume that people know what this technology is or how it's being used. And I think starting with the 101s, with the basics, is a really good way to educate residents. So I think also transparency is really important as well. So we want to be open and honest about how, as a city organization, we are using it. As a city government, we have a high burden on us to be open and to be transparent, because we're taking resident information. We're using taxpayer dollars to provide services. So transparency and being open through examples like the use case registry are also examples of communications and education.
Excellent, thank you. Michelle, can you bring it home for regulatory individuals, and how can we strike the balance between relying on AI? You gave some examples previously, but how can you think about relying more on human skill?
Yeah, I think this is an important thread that we've caught on this discussion here, which is one thing that, so I've been working in high tech for a long time, and I'm kind of a famous Googler in my space. Like, I'm really good at creating Google questions to get the answer that I need. And there's a joke in my house, because we have Alexas in every room and we ask questions. My husband loves asking Alexa questions all the time. I don't know if anyone, like, other people use it for other reasons, they play music, but we ask questions all the time. And he asks questions, and then he doesn't get the answer he wants. He's like, ask her the right kind of question. Then I'll ask her a question from Google. But then it stops, right? And I think it's important that we remember that ChatGPT is not a fancy Google toolbar, because it's not, you don't just put it in and then you get the answer and then you go off about your day. In my experience, I found that my best output from ChatGPT is thinking of it as a conversation. Think of it as a conversation of an expert that you would love to know more from. And even your prompt, like some of the best prompt suggestions I've seen is acting as X expert. Talk to me about this, solve this problem. And if you get really good at that and you think of ChatGPT as your ideal conversation partner, and you ask one question and then there's an output. You ask another question and then you go deeper. And it's just, if you think about it as a conversation, you can get an amazing amount of information that you can't get in any other type of static single question toolbar, because it grows with understanding what you're trying to figure out, and you can go down any path that you want in that single thread, and it really makes a huge difference about what you get out of it by thinking of it as a conversation rather than a Google search toolbar.
So it's like having another child, right?
A really smart one, but also one that lies. Right? So, yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you. Brad, over to you, last but not least.
You know, as I think about the challenges, one of the things that a lot of people talk about is this lawyer about a year ago who used ChatGPT to write a brief in New York, and it included a case citation for a case that didn't exist. It hallucinated the existence of this case. And the takeaway for some people is, oh, don't use, software for important topics. And that's not really the takeaway. That's not my takeaway. My takeaway is make sure you're using a product that's fit for the particular purpose. There are all sorts of ways to design software in order to make it fit for a particular purpose. In law, for example, it would have been child's play to design software that would go and check one of the official databases for cases to make sure every case is in there. You can have software check software, right? There's all sorts of fine-tuning that can be done. So it's beyond prompt engineering. It's actually changing the weights of the algorithm itself to fine-tune it for particular applications. And I think that's the future. I mean, ChatGPT came on board. We all started to use it for a million things. But we're going to see refined products that are much more suitable, much more fit for a particular purpose. And we need to seek those out if we want high-quality results.
Excellent. Thank you. And with that, I want to say this is our panel. I hope this has got you thinking a little bit. In the meantime, please join me in thanking our panelists.
Yeah.